Hi there, everybody. So this is our last week on um, informal fallacies, and actually we're through with fallacies as categories or definitions. There won't be any new ones added. But what we're going to look at in this module is what happens when you discover fallacies in ordinary language. I'll explain more about that in a moment. So just to review, we've been over all these fallacies. You've done a good job with them. So there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 under fallacies of relevance, 6 under fallacies of presumption, ambiguity, and transference. So that is 13. Weak induction is a bunch. Let's see, that's 5, 10. So there's 23 that we end up just short of 2 dozen. And all I would do is remind you that they can be remembered by what they're described as. Actually, these are fallacies of irrelevance. Just to emphasize again, these are things that enter into arguments that have no relevance to the argument. Attacking your opponent in an argument is just a tactic. It's actually a sign you're not winning the argument. In fact, all these would be a sign you're not winning the argument. In most of the time, they are used as tricks. They're used as strategies or tactics by someone who's arguing poorly or just is ignorant of the rules that go into to logic. Now, fallacies of presumption, ambiguity, and transference are actually 3 different categories, right? And you'll remember this is transference down here, right? It's composition, division, taking the parts of a whole and giving the attributes of the parts to the whole, right? So everybody on our soccer team is an all-star, therefore our team is great is not necessarily true. Division is the opposite. It's taking an attribute of the whole and assigning it to a part. So our soccer team is #1 in the country, therefore all of our players are all-stars. Maybe that none are. They just play together great as a team. Equivocation is, and amphibole is ambiguity. So ambiguity is anything that either the word is ambiguous or the sentence structure is ambiguous. So equivocation is the sentence structure is ambiguous. Equivocation is the words are being used, same words being used in 2 different ways at least. Amphibole is a slipperiness in the structure of the sentence. So the sign said it's fine to park here, so I parked there, right? But I got a ticket. I don't understand. Well, obviously the word fine means not okay, but a monetary penalty for breaking the law. Amphibole, so that's equivocation. Amphibole would be something like, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. Right? So I could be shooting the elephant in my pajamas, or the elephant could be in my pajamas when I shot it. I'm not going to shoot any elephants, just for the record, but there you go. Now, presumption has to do with begging the question, complex question, a false dichotomy, and suppressed evidence. So these are just basically tricks as well. Complex question, remember we also called it a loaded question. Begging the question is where the conclusion is part of, is actually a premise in disguise. So basically you're using the premise as the conclusion, which is a circular argument. And that's begging the question. False dichotomy is the either-or statement. Suppressed evidence is, I'm just not telling you a certain part of this argument that's incredibly important. So you can see how all these might be accidental. These are going to have to be probably premeditated. So then there's weak induction, fallacies, unqualified authority, ignorance, hasty, generalization, false cause, post hoc ergo propter hoc is the fallacy where because B follows A must have caused B. Non causa pro causa are 2 things that occur in a general time, not necessarily one right after another, like I washed the car and then it rained. Maybe they happened, you washed the car one evening and it rained the next morning. That's no causa pro causa. Slippery slope is where you progressively argue that if we go down this road that the other person's advocating, things will finally get exponentially terrible. Oversimplified cause is when we try to attribute simple answers to complex problems. Gambler's fallacy is the idea that somebody's on a winning streak, therefore they're going to continue to win, or vice versa. Someone's on a losing streak and therefore they will next. They're just have had a bad streak. The next time they're going to win. Weak analogy is going to always have the something is like something else, and weak analogy is just what it sounds like. The relationship that is analogous is not convincing. So these are all they'll all be critical to you in doing your midterm project. So be sure you know them well. So on fallacies of ordinary language. So ordinary language is just the language we speak, every day around the house, right? It's the language when we talk to friends, that we're going to go out with, and we talk about how this is just normal everyday language. However, in our normal everyday language, there is quite a bit of reasoning that goes on, and we do make statements about what we think to be true. And consequently, there are opportunities for fallacies to enter in. And a lot of times they're a lot harder to detect. They aren't as clear-cut as they're going to be in an argument where we say, okay, we're arguing logically about something. That kind of sets a delineation, whereas if we're just talking, we may not have our logic hat on, right? And so we may just walk right into something that is a fallacy without knowing it. So they're not terribly clear-cut, and they're not easily recognized, and there's lots of ways to create them. So when we are doing fallacies of ordinary language, we tend to commit them for three reasons. Either we do it intentionally, we know full well that our reasoning is defective, but they do it anyway because of perceived, perhaps real benefits for themselves and others. Basically, they manipulate the argument. Mental carelessness is just you aren't thinking, right? We're not in a formal setting. It's just ordinary language. We're not, when we talk in philosophy class about matters of, epistemology, how do we know what we know? Well, we've got a different mindset that we approach that with than if we're talking about which baseball team is going to win the playoffs. So you can get into mental carelessness if you're arguing about which pitcher and why that pitcher is better than the other pitcher. And then last but not least, it can be our worldview. Excuse me. Oh, let's see, it's 2 o'clock. I guess I get sleepy at 2 o'clock. I haven't eaten lunch, maybe that's it. The influence of worldview is probably real common as a source of fallacies of ordinary language, because we can assume that how we see the world is how everybody sees the world. We don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about how distinct worldviews can be between people. And in fact, it makes us a little squirrely when we run into people that see the world different than ours, because it's sort of a threat. It can be a threat to how we see the world. So worldview is a really common reason for fallacies of ordinary language, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. So what we're going to do in this unit, I'm not going to go page by page through all this and read every word on it. I think that you can work through it. I'll explain what you need to be looking for, and then you can spend some time looking at it and seeing if it makes sense to you. But first, I just want to give you some examples of fallacies of ordinary language and how we would use, intentional commission, mental carelessness, and influence of worldview to think about what caused those fallacies. All right. So, for instance, I saw a homeless person refuse a job, so homeless people must not want to work. Well, if you put on your fallacy hat, you know that that's a hasty generalization, right? You just saw one homeless person refuse a job, and now you think all homeless people are that way. And believe me, this is a far too common argument in ordinary language. I mean, we should know that a sample of two does not make for a successful analysis of a whole, right? And we could argue that this is just mental carelessness, right? That because the person's not thinking about the fact that the sample doesn't justify the conclusion. The fact that you saw even if you saw five, it would not indicate anything other than you saw five homeless people refuse jobs. And we have to know a whole lot more to know what that means. What type of jobs did they refuse? How old were they? What was the terms of the job? I mean, just because you're homeless doesn't mean you're just going to accept being enslaved. Nor does it mean that you should in a society that wants to be great. So mental carelessness fits here. Could it be worldview? Well, it could be. I mean, you could have a dim view of poor people or poverty itself. Could it be intentional? Could be. I mean, somebody might be baiting you. Somebody might be trying to argue for not funding homeless programs because, look, they don't even want to work and help themselves. So there's almost a chance that any of the three, intentional, mental carelessness, or worldview, could fit a fallacy of ordinary language. What I would urge you to do in what is part of actually any person who desires to be logical is that you give the arguer the benefit of the doubt and you assume the best about their argument. We don't really take the time to do that anymore. People disagree with us and we have a lightning reaction to how stupid they must be to not agree with how brilliant we are. It just happens too much. I mean, when we get that urge to say, just how dumb are you, that is pure ego, right? And I'm as guilty of it as anyone, but I strive to be less guilty of it, and we should all. So, if you don't stand for the national anthem, you should be fired. Patriotism is non-negotiable in this country. Well, that argument is fallacious because it's an appeal to force, right? You should be fired if you don't stand. Fire those football players. Colin Kaepernick basically was banned from football because he didn't stand during the national anthem. He knelt. I still don't know to this day why kneeling is seen as an aggressive act. It's a very vulnerable act. And patriotism is non-negotiable in this country is a worldview. There are people who believe that patriotism, true patriotism, would not stand during the national anthem for good reasons, right? Maybe the country has lost its way, and it is a way to protest. That is protected by free speech, right? So there's a lot of reasons, but this sounds like an argument, given it the benefit of the doubt, an argument of worldview. Somebody that equates, it could be mental carelessness because the word patriotism is not used here correctly for the situation. I mean, it is patriotic to critique a country. What word should be here is nationalism, but so you could maybe argue mental carelessness, but more than likely it is a sense of worldview. Okay. So if we allow universal health care, soon the government will control every aspect of our lives and we'll be living under socialism. It's a slippery slope argument. Do people go down the slippery slope argument intentionally to try and win an argument? I think they probably could. There might be a view here that's just mentally careless, or it could be worldview. Like I said, you never know. But I think it's probably intentional. Understanding, instead of worrying about police reform, we should focus on how celebrities corrupt our youth. Okay, that's a red herring. Those things don't have anything to do with each other. You're not one to talk about police reform, obviously. You're trying to steer the conversation somewhere else, and this is probably mental carelessness. So you get the idea. They're just, of course, she's against corporate Jack. She's a socialist. That's an attack of the person, ad hominem. It's probably intentional because of the emotive nature of the word being used. No one has proven the election fraud didn't happen, so it must have. This is a really fascinating part of the political climate in our country. There has been election fraud in our country, not recently, but there has been. And today we're focusing on exceptions to the rule rather than the rule itself. But this is obviously an appeal to ignorance, and it is a worldview issue. It's not a fact issue, because it's just not a fact that we've had election fraud of a magnitude that would affect an election. Now, maybe you could argue this is mental carelessness in not defining what you mean by fraud. That's what I would want to ask. So what do you mean by fraud, right? Let's talk about that. Had there been, one-offs of fraud? Maybe. Depends on we can't get the majority of the population to vote, so I'm not sure, people knocking the door down to vote doesn't seem likely, but yeah, I suppose there have been some, but what do you mean by fraud? Certainly not enough to throw an election recently. You would have to go back to the 1960s for that. Now, here's one you could almost predict. Almost all of these fallacies are worldview fallacies because of who. This is something you should do when you're detecting a fallacy in ordinary language. Think about the source, right? If it's the Catholic bishops, it's probably going to be very, very closely tied to worldview, because worldview is closely tied to tradition. Marriage is, by its very nature, the union of a man and a woman. Therefore, same-sex marriage is impossible. It's begging the question, and it is worldview, but you could argue that it's also mental carelessness. Obviously, same-sex marriage is not impossible. It's just whether you decide to recognize it as marriage or not, as the institution. So there's some word use in there that's a little ambiguous. For centuries, marriage has been understood as a union of one man and a woman. The redefinition of marriage is a radical change and contrary to the timeless institution. Now, that's less mentally careless in more of an appeal to force, because it is talking about the institution of marriage, which is an appeal to tradition, and really closely associated with worldview. Over here, we got same-sex union contradicts the nature of marriage because it cannot cooperate with God to create new life. That's equivocation, right? I mean, that contradicts nature and cannot cooperate with God to create new life. Well, marriages between heterosexual people don't necessarily cooperate with God to create new life. Many heterosexual couples get married and they have no intention of having babies, or they're too old to have babies. They're widowed and they get married at an old age, which is perfectly permissible in Catholicism, but they're not going to cooperate with God to create new life. So it's equivocation, and it's a worldview, of course. Children need both a mother and a father. False dichotomy. They don't. There are things in between. Children are married by other than mother, or raised by other than mother than fathers. But like I said, one thing to consider is where the argument is coming from. Consider the source of the argument. If it's your grandfather, grandmother, if it's your father or mother, if it's your sister or brother, it is going to have a different potential to it as far as the reason for the fallacy is concerned. Now, there's more. I didn't know there were so many of them. Oh, this is one I think might be mental carelessness. Legalizing same-sex marriage would lead to polygamy and other immoral unions. It sounds like slippery slope, and you would think that might be intentional. and I guess you could argue that way, but I think it's just mentally careless to equate same-sex marriage with polygamy. They're not the same thing, right? So there's nothing logical about one leading to the other. No civil authority can redefine what it did not create, since marriage is a sacrament. True in the Catholic Church, it is a sacrament. And the Catholic Church could take a stance like this because it is a stance against the authority of the state to define what marriage is, because marriage in the Catholic Church is a sacrament. So there is civil authority and there is sacred authority, and that all comes from worldview. All right. So I took a couple of different speeches here, and this part I'm not going to go word for word through, but I want you to look at a set of speeches here. One is by Nikki Haley on abortion, and I've taken I've taken some excerpts, and what I'd like you to do is to practice both trying to find the fallacy and then trying to rationalize in your mind what you think the reason for the fallacy is. Now, Nikki Haley is making her speech during the time she was running for president. So she is a political figure seeking office. And so she's making an argument against a woman's right to choose. And I think there are arguments to be made here about why she's making the mistake she's making in her argument. For instance, Democratic fearmongers say Republicans are about to ban all abortion nationwide and send women to prison. So you're attributing you're turning the tables on your opponent here and calling them fearmongers. This could be ad hominem as well. Could be ad hominem and it could be straw man, because this is not true that Democratic fearmongers are all saying Republicans. There are Republicans that have talked about sending people to prison for violating a state rule that forbids abortion, but not all abortions nationwide fall into that category. And I think she's intentionally committing this in order to stir up her crowd. Whereas over here, it's an appeal to emotion and a hasty generalization. But I don't think she's trying to score cheap points there. I think she probably really does. I have to give her the benefit of the doubt for the argument there. Only 7 countries on Earth allow elective late-term abortions. We're talking about brutal regimes like Communist China and North Korea. I would say this is possibly a weak analogy. It's implied, the analogy's implied, that we're going to be like these countries. But it's probably more clearly a slippery slope, and it's intentional because it's meant to cause an emotional reaction. This shouldn't be about one movement winning and another losing. It's about saving babies and supporting moms. It's a false dichotomy because the other side of this equation is not against saving babies and is not against supporting moms. So you can be on the pro-choice side and on the anti-abortion side and a right to life side, whatever you want to call it. And those two, in both people being concerned about these things. There's no dichotomy that has to exist between the two. In fact, we would do ourselves well to realize that people on both sides of this argument care about babies, right? They care. That the question is complicated. It can't be. This could probably be an oversimplified cause argument as well. But I think she's probably intentionally committing this as well, because she's trying to make this dichotomy. A way you could go about this is to ask yourself which of the fallacies are more likely to be intentional, and I did a little of that at the beginning, but that might be able to tell you what's likely to be down here. And like I said, it's not an exact science. I'm only going through this because I'd like you to get used to this. I'd like you to be able to do it in public. I'd like you to be superstars at being able to calm people down and to explain to them why logic has to follow a certain set of rules, and not participating yourself in fallacies of ordinary language. All right, so Obama on guns. This was a speech that Obama made right after Sandy Hook. And Sandy Hook was a particularly brutal mass shooting at an elementary school. Took a number of teachers' lives and a whole lot of kids' lives. And so Obama's reacting to this as the commander-in-chief of the United States, the president. He's making a statement to the press and the people. And he says a majority of Americans support banning the sale of military-style assault weapons. Majority of Americans support requiring background checks. Now, even if he had the facts to back it up, and he may have had, this is a speech not about persuasion, but more about emotion. But if he had the facts to back it up, this would still be a fallacy. It would be an appeal to the people or an appeal to popularity. Just because most people believe this doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. But I think this, and I think this was intentional on Barack's part, because I think he wanted to get people persuaded. He is probably fixated on trying to take this moment when there's so much carnage and try to say things that might help prevent this from happening again. And I think he's basically trying to win an argument here that at a minimum we could do that much. Each one of these Americans was a victim of everyday gun violence that takes the lives of 10,000 or more people every year. Violence that we cannot accept as routine. Well, it is routine in our country, and that way he sets it up, it's a loaded question. So you're okay with 10,000 Americans dying every year? You accept unacceptable violence, right? Well, no, there's not just two positions on this, right? This is probably worldview. It's probably not intentional. It's probably, I have to take him at his word in the best possible light. I believe in his worldview, he does not accept this as routine and believes that we can't accept it as routine if we're going to be the country that he would like to lead us to be. All right. If there's even one thing that we can do to prevent any of these events, we have a deep obligation, all of us, to try. That's appeal to emotion. And I think it's a worldview. I think he believes that it takes a village to make changes like this in our country, and he's trying to implore people to do that. The idea that we lurch from crisis to crisis, ruin the full faith and credit of the United States of America, that's not how to run a great country. That's a slippery slope argument. It's probably intentional. He's trying to play on the heartstrings of people who are Americans. They love their country, and they are probably disturbed by this, but they may have different views about gun control than Obama does. So this is a couple of slides on the ruling by the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade. And it's a particularly interesting ruling, and it's full of logical fallacies. By the way, I'm not picking on this. It's just this was an extraordinary ruling, and we're going to look at another ruling after this. And together, while they are odd departures from their fallacious arguments in some sense, in other senses, they signal a change, a reframing of the questions of states' rights and the rights of the federal government. So basically, this was a decision to return the authority to regulate or ban abortions entirely to individual states, ending nearly 50 years of federally protected abortion access. The ruling didn't ban abortions nationwide. It just says that there is no protected right to an abortion at a federal level. So states make their own rules now, and before they couldn't tell anyone that they couldn't get an abortion, but now they can, and they can make a decision state by state. So the decision means that the court cannot or will not make a decision as to the rights of a fertilized egg or fetus within the time frame of a pregnancy. Now, it's kind of odd because people are thinking this is evidence that the court agrees that fertilized egg or fetus should be protected. No, that's not what the court says at all. This is not, the court does not get into the rights of the fetus or the rights of the woman. The court gets into the idea that states can decide which is the case. The court's decision is that fertilized eggs and fetuses had rights that override those of the woman that it resides in from the moment of fertilization. So I don't know why hold on a second. The court's decision is that a fertilized egg or fetus had rights that override those of the woman that it resides in from the moment of fertilization. Okay. So it will not make a decision. Either it's not making a decision or this is the decision. This is what's motivating its decision, right? So by knocking down the federal, that's what it was, by knocking down the federal guarantee of a right to abortion, then either it's saying it cannot or will not make a decision about the rights one way or the other, or it is saying that the federal government believes that this fertilized egg or fetus has rights that override those of the woman that it resides in, and so the federal government can't make that call. Is not going to guarantee federal access to abortion, but at the same time is going to allow the states to decide. So this is weird because it's saying that there are rights that override the rights of the women, but so it cannot, as a federal body, it cannot go along with guaranteed access. So it's going to kick it down to the state level. Otherwise, what it's saying is this first one, which is we're not going to say. We cannot, or maybe we won't, say whether a fetus or fertilized egg has any rights one way or the other, which would be strange for the court since that's kind of what the court's supposed to do. So the court cannot or will not make a decision as to the rights of a fertilized egg or fetus within the time frame of the pregnancy. The ruling leaves to the people and their representatives a decision it deems to be difficult and complex. Thus, the court will not or cannot make a decision on the difficult or complex matter of constitutional rights of a fertilized egg or fetus, but at the same time, the court considers that states can manage to make such a decision. Therefore, if that's what they're saying, then what is the purpose of the Supreme Court if it cannot solve complex questions that have to do with rights? If it will not or cannot decide on matters related to constitutional rights, that doesn't seem likely. It doesn't seem that they're going to make a decision of this problem with number one. Number one's the problem over here, right? So this is the argument of why that's probably not the case. It seems unlikely that the Supreme Court would kick to the states a decision that it doesn't feel like it can make because it's too complicated, right? That just doesn't ring right. So number two must then be explanation, and that is that the court's decision is that a fertilized egg has rights that override those of the woman that it resides in from the moment of fertilization. The only difference between a woman having something done to her body to effect an abortion and another person having something done to their body, such as ingesting medication or undergoing surgery, is the fact that the woman has a fertilized egg in her body. Hence, the decision of the court that a woman does not have such a right immediately upon fertilization of one of her eggs is a decision that fertilized eggs or fetuses have overridden the right. In other words, that a fertilized egg or fetus has rights that the court deems to be constitutional rights that cancel the right of the woman to have certain things done to her body. So basically, I guess the fallacy here is they take that stance, but then they kick it to the states to decide. Basically, they say, this is our stance, but we aren't going to commit government overreach. So there is behind this a renegotiation of states' rights versus federal rights. Okay? So the court is making an extraordinary decision that while they deem a fertilized egg or fetus to have constitutional rights to continue existence, the court specifically states that it takes no interest in the question of whether that right is respected or protected, that it's up to the government of an individual state to choose whether to do so. So that is the crux of why this ruling is so darn weird. It takes no interest in the question. It says that this fetus or fertilized egg has rights, but the Supreme Court of the United States takes no interest in the question of whether that right is respected or protected. So it seems to indicate that even something as fundamental as protecting unborn life is to at least one side of the political spectrum or one side of this argument or debate, they aren't going to take a position on it. The states have to take the position. So it's almost like the government doesn't exist to protect the rights of the people. Now, this is kind of an antithesis to what the founders had in mind. So the court has ruled it will continue to rule in this vein. So what are the implications of that? So it will continue not to take a position on universal rights, I mean, they could say that civil rights need to be managed at a state level, and they could affirm civil rights, but take no interest in protecting them. This is a fallacious argument. It's shot full of holes. You can't be the Supreme Court of the United States, and you can't even be a traditionalist interpreter of the Constitution and end up here. Something else is afoot. The game is afoot. Let's go down here. So the Second Amendment is what guarantees a right to bear arms. So let's look at the arguments that get made here and talk about why they're fallacious. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now that is put in the order it's put for a reason. First off, the Second Amendment says that every law-abiding American has the natural right to protect his family with the same kinds of weapons criminals already have. Otherwise, only criminals and dictators would be armed. Attempts at reasonable regulation are just the first step towards confiscation, other people argue. Just the first step, as we've seen in countries like England and Australia, where personal liberty has been all but vanished. So this is the argument that supports the normal interpretation of the Second Amendment. I'm going to interpret it in the way I believe it is written, and I'm going to show you that the first argument over here is a slippery slope, and that attempts at reasonable regulation are not the first step towards confiscation. They are a part of what the Second Amendment guarantees. All right? Common sense, so here's the other argument for gun control. Common sense tells us that fewer guns mean fewer deaths. In Japan, where strict gun laws were virtually eliminated, where strict gun laws in Japan, strict gun laws have virtually eliminated violent crime. There's a typo there. The Second Amendment doesn't apply to us in modern times. It's about muskets. This is the argument of the other side. One side, you heard before, this side is now saying, oh, come on, they aren't talking about, big rifles or Mac 9s or whatever the latest toy is that people like to carry in their, when they're playing cop. The Second Amendment is about muskets, not about modern weaponry. Claiming it covers today's firearms is like saying the First Amendment, the right to free speech, protects sending spam or posting lies on social media. Clearly, the founders didn't intend that. This is a traditionalist interpretation of the Second Amendment. Like, hey, they were talking about muskets. Come on, this doesn't apply today. If you're going to interpret this today, you have to interpret it in the context of the weapons we have. Excuse me. Just like we do the First Amendment. Here's what's behind the rhetoric. The right to bear arms is not unlimited. We already have restrictions on what kind of guns the individual can have. It is a federal offense to own a fully automatic weapon. Federal offense, right? Or a short-barreled rifle, so don't saw off your shotgun. Any kind of undetectable firearm, a ghost gun. Armor-piercing ammunition, so things that will go through metal, and police flak jackets. And ammunition with explosive agents, so think of a rocket-propelled grenade. RPGs will get you put in prison if you're caught with one. So there is a basis for regulating arms, and it is already in play. Furthermore, Part 1 of the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia. This doesn't mean a well-trained militia. This doesn't mean a drilled militia. This doesn't mean a militia with all the guns it needs. This means a militia that is regulated by the federal government. The founders of the country weren't crazy enough to give everybody in the country carte blanche to have whatever weapon they want and destabilize society. Gun control is guaranteed by the Second Amendment and fully constitutional. A well-regulated militia is meant to be a militia that is whose armament and whose organization is regulated by the government. Thus, insurrectionist interpretations of why this amendment is in the Constitution are contrary to its historic intention. It is them giving you a modernist, which they should not do because they're typically not modernist in their interpretation of the Constitution. They're more traditionalist. But this, to say that we have the right to bear arms so that we can rebel against our government is a complete modern reading of the intention of the founders. There's a thing here you can watch. I would urge you to watch. It'll give you a little bit more information on informal fallacies, and really that is that. So we are finished with fallacies. We'll be moving on into the application of logic in a number of different fields. I like this part of the course because now we're going to take what we learned up front and we're going to see how many places we can use logic in everyday life. So hopefully you'll find that enjoying too. If you have any questions, let me know.